제4회 전국청소년 4.3 영어스피치 대회에 오신 여러분 진심으로 환영합니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 오늘 진행을 맡은 아나운서 박아름입니다. 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회는 제주 4.3 평화재단과 한국 유네스코 협회 연맹이 매년 공동으로 개최하고 있는데요. 4회째인 이번 대회는 전국에서 응모한 68명 가운데 예선 심사를 통과한 18명의 학생이 오늘 이곳 Kbs제주 공개홀에서 열리는 본선 대회에 참가하게 됩니다. 자, 그럼 지금부터 제4회 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회를 시작하겠습니다. 이어서 오늘 대회를 주최한 제주 4.3 평화재단 고희범 이사장께서 개회사를 해주시겠습니다. 여러분 큰 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
안녕하십니까? 반갑습니다. 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회에 참석하신 청소년 여러분 환영합니다. 어느덧 4회째를 맞이하는 영어 스피치 대회는 세계 평화와 인류 발전을 위해서 노력하는 유네스코의 이념을 실현하고 평화와 인권이라는 인류 보편의 가치가 4.3을 통해 전 세계로 발현되기를 바라는 마음으로 준비했습니다. 청소년 여러분, 74년 전 평화를 열망하고 진정한 독립을 꿈꿨던 제주도민들의 정의로운 저항은 오랫동안 처참한 죽음과 이념의 덫에 갇혀야 했습니다. 하지만 4.3은 제주의 깊은 슬픔이자 우리 현대사의 큰 아픔을 넘어 이제 대한민국의 역사로 자리매김하고 있습니다. 또한 4.3의 진실을 밝히기 위한 제주도민들의 정의로운 노력 역시 화해와 상생, 치유와 통합의 상징으로 세계 과거사 청산의 모델이 되고 있습니다. 청소년 여러분, 이제 여러분들의 차례입니다. 과거 지하에 갇혀 있던 4.3의 진실의 힘을 통해서 지금 우리와 만날 수 있었듯이 교과서와 기념관 그리고 유적지에 머물러 있던 4.3의 진실 역시 공감과 연대의 힘을 통해 더 넓은 세상과 소통할 수 있습니다. 4.3이 여러분들의 일상에서 인권과 평화의 감수성으로 되살아날 때 비로소 여러분은 세계 민주시민으로 성장할 수 있을 것이라고 생각합니다. 4.3 영어 스피치 대회가 여러분의 성장의 작은 한 걸음이 되기를 바랍니다. 쫄지 마시고 평소의 실력 충분히 발휘하시기를 바랍니다. 대회를 위해서 함께 노력해 주신 한국 유네스코 협회 연맹 유재건 회장님, 한국 유네스코 제주협회 이선아 회장님을 비롯한 회원 여러분, 그리고 대회 운영위원 여러분의 노고에 감사드립니다. 또한 이 대회에 많은 도움을 주신 박순애 교육부 장관님, 오영훈 제주특별도지사님, 김광수 제주특별자치도 교육감님, 그리고 이 좋은 장소와 행사 진행을 맡아주신 Kbs제주 총국에도 깊은 감사를 드립니다. 코로나19 등 어려운 여건 속에서도 오늘 대회를 준비하고 참석해 주신 청소년 여러분께 진심으로 감사를 드리면서 좋은 결실을 기대하겠습니다. 이 자리에 계신 모든 분들의 건강과 행운을 기원합니다. 고맙습니다.
제4회 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회 중학생부 경연을 시작하겠습니다. 경연 순서는 오전에 추첨에 따라 이루어졌고요. 학생들은 무대 위에서 3, 4분 동안 준비해온 멘트를 이야기하시면 됩니다. 오늘 경연의 첫 문을 열어줄 참가자는 브랭섬홀 에이시아 윤정원 학생입니다. 상처만 남긴 제주 4.3의 항쟁과 학살의 기억들, The Memories of Jeju April 3rd, Uprising and Massacre, Only Left Scars 라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 참가번호 1번 브랭섬홀 아시아의 윤정원입니다. 오늘 4.3 사건이 더 널리 알려졌으면 하는 마음에 참가하게 되었고요. 오늘 열심히 해보겠습니다. 화이팅!
It was 74 years ago. The woman cannot
still forget what happened 74 years ago. Back then, did you know that Jeju Island was an island, but without freedom, rights, and power? And there, the April 3rd Uprising and Massacre broke out. Today, I'm going to talk about what this was about, why it happened, and how it put people in danger and trauma. The woman, my neighbor, is the victim of the April 3rd Uprising and Massacre. Fortunately, she's still alive, but she's saying that it was so terrible that she wants to delete the memory. It happened at 2 a.m. on April 3rd in 1948 in Jeju Island. Before talking about the incident, we need to know about the reason why it happened. The origin of the Uprising and Massacre happened a month and 2 days ago from the date. On March 1st, one child was run over by the mounted policeman, but the policeman did not care about it. And then it started. Other citizens who witnessed the scene got furious and they threw rocks at the police ruthlessly. Then the other policemen shot a gun at the people who threw rocks. This was the starting point of April 3rd Uprising and Massacre. The cause of the incident stemmed from the population of Jeju Island. Due to the ridiculous reason that there were not many people on the island, the government did not involve the vote results from only Jeju Island because it lacked the majority. To continue on, the Korean army went to Jeju to kill people who did not live 5 kilometers nearby the beach because they decided to think they are the mobs, and they started to call them the rest, the communists. Therefore, my neighbor needed to go somewhere else to escape from the army rather than picking up her things or thinking what to do. This merciless policy killed about 25,000 to 30,000 innocent people. There was no mercy, and it implants memories to people that they do not want to even think about. In some of the worm craters, people used to put people's corpses, and dogs ate them. Then, the dogs would also bite the people, and people used to get rabies. That vicious circle went on and on. After I heard the story from various people, I was stunned by the horrible scenes. I felt so sorry. Other than my neighbor, I could hear many sad stories, such as a person who sacrificed for his family by being stabbed to death by bamboo, and a person who put her belongings on a road carefully to make it easy to find her even though she was going to die. Obviously, this is a serious issue because it happened before and is happening now. So why not in the future? In the past, there are a lot of conflicts such as the Korean War and World War II, and they only left pains and traumas. Now, there is the Russian-Ukraine war. Even though they know that this war would bring a huge wavelengths and put people in danger, they are doing this again. In the future, we really need to prevent this situation so that this tragedy cannot be repeated. I was surprised at the fact that April 3rd Uprising and Massacre has not been spread to the world yet. However, the Korean War, which has a similar scale with this, has gone around the world. Therefore, we should spread out the miserable pains of April 3rd Uprising and Massacre to arouse attention from people. For going a step forward to a better world, we need to pay attention to society and help each other not to make any more conflicts. If one part of the world gets in the fight, that's all our responsibility to settle and care about it. I hope that an unbearable conflict does not happen again by remembering April 3rd Uprising and Massacre. Thanks for listening.
네, 다음은 BIS 서예주 학생입니다. 자유와 권리라는 보편적인 가치, The Value of Freedom and Rights라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 2번 BIS의 서예주입니다. 제가 오늘 4.3 사건에 대해 많은 공부했고 그리고 많은 지식들을 쌓아왔으니 오늘 후회 없이 그 지식들을 세상에 알리도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. As the name of the flower, 동백꽃, contains the word 겨울동, camellia is a flower that blooms in the cold winter. The vivid red petals symbolizes strong vitality by bursting colorful flowers and blooming up in the whole cold winter. The flower language of camellia, waiting, the symbol of Jeju, shows the victims of Jeju 403 incident, waiting for the fear to finally end. The curiosity about the Jeju 403 incident arose as to why they waited and longed so much. August 15, 1945, just after the joy of liberation, there was a terrible accident that caused horror in Jeju. Everything started on March 1st, 1947, where 6 people were killed while protesting against the police, who ignored a young child that was accidentally hit by a police officer's horse. Due to this happening, the unrest occurred on April 3rd, 1948, where the armed conflict and suppression took place on Jeju Island all the way until September 21st, 1954. The horrific and indiscriminate incident has slaughtered 10% of Jeju citizens, including many innocent people. Ignoring ideology, freedom, and human rights turned the seemingly peaceful island of Jeju into a bloody land. Aunt Suni, a short novel by Hyung Gi-young in 1978, is a story dealing with the Jeju 403 incident. And it vividly shows how the violence committed by the states affects individuals through Aunt Suni. This novel shows the tragedy of the people living during this incident and how this event influences so many people nearby. The Jeju 403 incident was a matter of human rights violation and deprivation of freedom. Nevertheless, this is a sad history that took half a century for the truth to be revealed. Among all, the saddest thing is that even now, after the 4th Industrial Revolution, many people around the world still do not receive the rights they should receive as humans. The place we're currently living at, a peaceful land where all the rights are given, is what people think normal. However, what would other places be like? In North Korea, people are brainwashed every single day and are restricted in freedom of expression, religion, assembly, and association. North Korea will be just a simple example in which there will be so many more places with people lacking freedom. History repeats over and over, and humans make the same mistakes all over again, since we never learn from our mistakes. Once and for all, it is time to finally recognize the past and change how the world is working to make the world a better place. In May 2022, Yoon Suk-yeol was elected as president. President Yoon Suk-yeol, who attended the 74th anniversary memorial service for victims of Jeju 403, emphasized, "It is a natural duty of a liberal democracy to remember the painful histories and innocent sacrifices of 403, and to pursue universal values of harmony, coexistence, freedom, and human rights. It is only up to a few activists and organizations to raise the issue. And if we do not have the interest of the people, we will be lamenting the same. No matter how much damage the modern history has done in the past, If we modify our minds and pay attention to the freedom and human rights of our neighbors, the result of our choices will be bright. Thank you.
다음은 브랭섬홀 에이시아 이해담 학생입니다. 제주 민주주의 항쟁, The Jeju Pro-Democratic Resistance라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 저는 브랭섬홀 아시아 재학 중인 참가번호 3번 이해담이라고 합니다. 먼저 이 대회에 나와서 4.3 사건에 대해서 이야기할 수 있게 되어 정말 영광이고 열심히 준비한 만큼 최선을 다해서 좋은 결과가 있도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다. Every day in the week I got tortured. The police demanded me to accept false accusations. I had no choice but to give them the answer they wanted, accepting my crimes, which I haven't committed. This was a quote from Go Tae-myung, a victim of the 4.3 incident. Like him, many people were tortured and captured, resulting in 30,000 deaths, a massacre of 10% of the entire population of Jeju in 1948, just 3 years after Korea's liberation from Japan. The 4.3 incident was an event started due to police brutality on innocent citizens who seek justice on a young girl who was heavily injured by the police. Citizens rioted, and the police responded with violence and gunshots. As the violence increased, the government labeled Jeju to be a communist area and tried to cover up their actions. They continued violence on people and even set fire on villages just because people in Jeju were supposedly communists. But I am not here to discuss the details of the unjustified martial law, the wrongful labeling as the rise of communism, the atrocities of police brutality and war crimes committed by the South Korean government against their own citizens of Jeju, not to mention acting under the influence of a foreign military and countless human rights violations. Rather, I wish to focus on the aftermath of this extreme violence, and most importantly, the lack of awareness the society has over the Jeju Uprising. Unlike other democratic movements such as the Gwangju May 18th Democratic Movement in 1980 or the April 19th Revolution for Democracy in 1960, the Jeju 3rd of April incident is still labeled as an incident. In the case of Jeju, the government enacted a martial law and began eradication campaigns against citizens that only seek justice, even conducting elections brought out to vote at gunpoint. The citizens that wished for a unified Korea for peaceful and democratic means became victims of violence and were circumstantially forced to fight back. Due to the government's lack of actions taken towards the 4.3 incident, current society is unaware of what this incident is. Ladies and gentlemen, in present society, the worst crime that can be committed by us citizens is ignorance, and we are letting it happen right now. How an event that thousands of lives and rights were taken away in is not being recognized even in its own nation is unheard of. Not only did it affect people at the time, but the 4.3 incident contributed to making us be able to live with the rights we're entitled to right now without having to fight for it. Remember, the citizens of Jeju, people like Go Tae-myung could have stayed home. They could have given in and surrendered, not go through torture or get thrown in the sea. But they made a stand. Not because they were fearless, but because they were brave enough to overcome their fears and resist against wrongfulness. It is our job to remember their bravery against injustice and take action. Therefore, I believe that the naming of the 4.3 incident should be changed into something more suiting and honoring of the sacrifices made by our ancestors, the Jeju Pro-Democratic Resistance. Not only will this name raise awareness and break many perceptions that people could have had due to its wrongful labeling, but it is something that should have been done years ago. I would like to end by thanking all the people who have fought for not only theirs, but our lives. I cannot express how grateful I am that I get to live in a world where I am given rights and safety. I believe that it is our turn to pay back our debt and give all the victims the honor they deserve. Thank you.
네, 다음은 제주중학교 고원재 학생입니다. 제주 4.3 학살을 대표하는 붉은 꽃, The Red Flower Representing Jeju April 3rd Massacre라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 참가번호 4번 고원재라고 합니다. 제주의 아픈 역사를 함께 공감하고 기억하고자 참가하게 되었습니다. 네, 열심히 하겠습니다.
April is a season when colorful and beautiful spring flowers bloom in every alley in front of our house and are full of unknown wildflowers. But there is a tree that I will never forget in this sizzling blue April. April was a time when Jeju people experienced darkness. The Jeju April 3rd Massacre was revealed on April 3, 1948, as of March 1, 1947, and an armed conflict on Jeju Island for 7 years until September 21, 1954. 10% of people in Jeju died during this period. At the time, Jeju Island was literally hell. Whether it's a rebellion, an uprising, a revolution, or anything, it couldn't be expressed in words. Many people were sacrificed by police and soldiers. Tens of thousands of innocent people who were killed in Jeju were not the rest who participated in the rebellion, nor were they the main players in the uprising. They were just ordinary people. They were my grandfather, grandmother, father, mother, uncle, friends, and younger brothers. One of the events that shows how indiscriminate the suppression was at the time was the Bukchon village incident located in Jocheon. In retaliation, when 2 soldiers were killed in a surprise attack by armed forces. Soldiers gathered some 350 residents of Bukchon village on the playground of Bukchon Elementary School and shot them. Pregnant women and children under the age of 10 were slaughtered regardless of age or gender. This is why we must sincerely grieve and console their death, even though it is too late. 74 years have already passed, but there are still traces of April 3rd throughout the beautiful Jeju Island. Somewhere in Jeju, there are still April 3rd unjust sorrows waiting for our help. So in April, I hope you'll notice the real meaning of red flowers. In retaliation, when 2 soldiers were killed in a surprise attack by armed forces. Even now, I believe that the tragedy will never be repeated on this land if the Jeju people and the Korean people all over the country commemorate and awaken the history of the tragedy. And I think that the Jeju April 3rd incident must be remembered and is no longer buried or hidden history. Finally, the tragic history that never healed, the sad and heartbreaking story, and Jeju April 3rd should be shared and remembered. Thank you.
이어서 영종중학교 정보현 학생이 발표를 하겠습니다. 우리가 4.3 사건을 더욱 가치롭게 기억할 방법. The way to remember April 3rd incident more valuable 이라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 저는 참가번호 5번 영종중학교 정보현입니다. 예전에 제주를 여행하면서 알게 되었던 이 4.3 사건에 대해 알리고 또 피해에 대한 보상을 목소리를 낼 수 있도록 이 대회에 참가하게 되었습니다. 감사합니다.
Do you guys know this flower? Today at this place, I'd like to introduce you guys what this flower symbolizes in Jeju. 3 years ago, I visited the beautiful island Jeju for the first time with my friends and parents with a big smile on our face. Everything in Jeju was beautiful, and as its nickname, it was like an island that symbolized peace. After finishing all our schedules on the last day of our trip, April 3rd, our parents took us to 4.3 Peace Park. That day, at the park, I heard a story about an old lady. She couldn't eat fish. She doesn't know how to write. she lived her life with her human rights ignored, the right that every human being must have. Then why? It was because she was a victim of a 4.3 incident that made Jeju Island stain with blood of innocent citizens instead of the gentle breeze of spring. The Emerald Sea of Woljeongni, where I walk with a smile, Bukchonli, with pretty red flowers. Not everyone could smile in these places. I became solemn and embarrassed. Then what is 4.3 incident and how should we remember it? The Jeju 4.3 incident was an event in which Jeju Island was burned, injured, and suffered for about 7 years and 7 months from 1947 March 1st. Countless women, men, young children, students, and even pregnant women have also been victims of genocide and torture. At that time, Jeju people who were living in poor conditions were unable to withstand the growing population, the following Great Famine, and the system of US. Jeju residents voiced strong criticisms toward the government. But far from apologizing for the strong voice, government called Jeju a red island and sent Northwest Youth League and countless policemen to torment them. Accordingly, Jeju residents staged an armed uprising on the April 3rd, and the massacre started from this is Jeju 4.3 incident. Now, we only crave the ways to remember these pains. But do we actually know why we should remember the 4.3 incident in particular? Is it simply because a lot of people died? Like 4.3, there are various different cases in which human rights are ignored and died. So then why is that? I think finding answers to this question and telling the future generations why we should recollect the 4.3 is the right way to remember this pain and what our society should tell to a lot of people. I think we are all trying to remember this is because not only our country has rejected the democracy and hid the case for a long time, but they have not compensated the Jeju people who've got an unforgettable scar. The compensation here is not just about the material things, but actively listening to their voice and telling the whole nation the truth. Our further pretentious behavior cannot help them anymore. It is impossible to remove the made scar. We must help them to receive a proper treat from our country with ongoing efforts of informing people why 4.3 should be remembered. What I heard and saw about the old lady stories and things related to slaughter are stuck inside my head and sometimes makes me to think what a real country and what a real justice is. The flower that I've introduced in the beginning is Camellia flower. It symbolizes the Jeju 4.3 incident, meaning that the souls of victims fall silently to the cold ground like a flower. We should not let these souls to fall to the cold ground anymore. They are people who deserves to be respected in a warm sky. Thank you for giving me a chance to inform about this heartbreaking story. Thank you.
다음은 효돈중학교 윤기은 학생입니다. 4.3 사건을 모두에게 알리는 방법. How should we let others know about the April 3rd incident? 라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 6번 효돈중학교 윤기은입니다. 저는 제주로 이사와서 처음 4.3 사건에 대해 알게 되었는데 생각보다 제주에 사는 친구들도 4.3 사건을 모르는 친구들이 많아서 이번 기회에 4.3 사건에 대해 알리고자 이 대회에 참가하게 되었습니다. 열심히 하겠습니다. Hello, I'm Yoon Gi-eun, a Hyodong Middle School student. The first time I learned about the April 3rd incident was through April 3rd education that I received at school after moving to Jeju from another region only 5 years ago. When I learned about it, I was shocked that 25,000 to 30,000 people were killed for no reason. Also, I was angry at myself for never knowing the painful history of my country. And soon I realized that the current society, where many people like me don't know about the April 3rd incident was wrong, and that our society, which is indifferent to painful history, had to change. So I came to this contest to talk about how to let others know about the April 3rd incident. Then, how should our society change? And what can you do to let others know about the April 3rd incident? First of all, I think the first step to making it known to the world should begin with everyone in Korea learning about and remembering it. Just as I first learned about it through school, the result of the April 3rd Incident Awareness Survey conducted by the Jeju Institute showed that more than 80% of the students knew about it because of school education. Therefore, since school education is the most effective way to inform students about the April 3rd incident, I think school education should be centered and schools should inform students about it. Also, the April 3rd incident should be taught in schools nationwide. Second, there should be a place to know about the April 3rd incident in other regions. I visited the April 3rd Peace Memorial Hall in Jeju. Through various visual data about the April 3rd incident, I was able to feel the situation vividly and understand it in more detail. In addition to the April 3rd Peace Memorial Hall, there are many April 3rd incident ruins in Jeju. But there is no such space in other areas. Other regions should also be provided with a variety of information about the April 3rd incident and a space for people to know about it. Third, media such as books, movies, and videos about it should be created to inform others about it. The best way to express the situation and people's feeling at the time of the incident is the most specific and vivid way to let the world know is through media. However, since books, movies, and video materials dealing with the April 3rd incident so far are not enough for the public and foreigners to understand, I think we should make more diverse and more multimedia. In addition, there are countless ways to inform people about the April 3rd incident, such as writing about it or making posters and sharing them on social media and introducing the historical sites about it. The April 3rd incident is a history that should not be repeated anywhere. And it's an event that not only our people, but also all of us should know and remember. I hope that our interest and efforts about the April 3rd incident will grow, and society's efforts will come together to promote it to the world. Thank you.
다음은 신성여자중학교 송시윤 학생입니다. 우리가 기억해야 할 일 4.3 Something that we have to know April 3rd 라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 7번 신성여자중학교에 재학 중인 송시윤입니다. 이 기회를 통해서 4.3 사건에 대해 더 잘 알게 되었고 열심히 준비한 만큼 최선을 다해 발표하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
How much do you know about Jeju Uprising? It's been 6 years since I moved to Jeju Island. I was not interested in Jeju Uprising at first and didn't pay much attention on the education of the history. However, this opportunity made me realize how important it is to know the truth of history and got me to concern the specific suggestions to spread its significance. The more I get to know the truth, the more I want to explore about it. So, I'm going to share you why we should know the truth of 4.3 incident and how critical it is to make people aware of it. I think this event is very significant because it was quite a big incident that more than 30,000 people died for 7 years and 7 months. Many people think Jeju Uprising would have started from the large action, but it was not at all. There was just a parade to commemorate Independence Movement Day on March 1st in Jeju. But there was misunderstanding between both sides led to a tragic history relating to political conflict. There are similar situations in other parts of the world. Lately in Ukraine, innocent citizens, children, and the elderly have been dying by Russia's attack. It is similar that innocent and powerless people are victimized by ideological conflict or logic of fight for international hegemony. I insist that many people should be aware of the seriousness of the Jeju Uprising and it should be widely known. Thus, I suggest a handy and accessible ways that can easily tell what the 4/3 incident was about. Then, what can be the most handy and accessible tools? It should be media, including movies, social media, TV contents, and so on. When I learned about issues, what convincing me most was movies. We sometimes found some movies that revealed the truth and eventually raised to the point, such as movie Dogani. In other cases of animation movie Coco, the topic, death, which might be heavy or dark, was brightly delivered a message to people and even children. I propose an animation movie covering 4/3 incident. Even though 4/3 history was tragic and sad, an animated version can approach the point with gentle touches. Furthermore, it will be easier for people and children to acquire a dark page of history. While I was studying about Jeju Uprising, I got to learn how cruel and harrowing it was. At the same time, as we know more of the Jeju Uprising, we can learn how we encountered similar circumstances and prevent them repeating in the future. Thank you for listening.
이어서 덕풍중학교 박세인 학생의 발표가 있겠습니다. 4.3의 올바른 미래를 위한 대화를 꿈꾸며 The Aprilers are meet Envisioning a Harmonious Future라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 8번 덕풍중학교 1학년 박세인입니다. 정부를 향한 저의 바람을 제 스피치에 담았고 저는 모두가 4.3 사건을 알게 될 그날까지 최선을 다할 것입니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 덕풍중학교 1학년 박세인입니다. 저는 오늘 4.3 사건을 널리 알리기 위한 대통령과 각 부처 장관들의 회의를 가상으로 진행하겠습니다. Good afternoon, everyone. Let us start our 43rd State Council meeting. Today, we'll hold a discussion regarding policies that can help spread awareness of the Jeju 4/3 incident. Before we begin, the governor of Jeju would like to say a few words. The 4/3 incident is a tragic event that has resulted in a second highest number of sacrifices post the Korean War. As the governor of Jeju, I consider it my duty to publicize the incident. I'm looking forward to effective suggestions and incorporation. Thank you. I assure you that we'll maximize our effort to raise awareness of the incident. Back to our topic, does anyone have any suggestions to make? Yes, Ms. Minister of Education. Amongst methods that can raise awareness of the incident, I think education should be prioritized. I promise to reform public school history textbooks to incorporate 4/3 incident-related lessons. Furthermore, I will create various opportunities for students to familiarize them with the incident. For example, specialists will be hired to give lectures and compulsory education will be assigned at each school. Thank you. Adding the 4/3 incident into every school's curriculum will bring positive outcomes. Anyone else? Ms. Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism. Are you familiar with dark tourism? It's a trip that intends to remember, reflect, and learn from the tragic past by visiting relevant historical sites. Forming dark tours in Jeju will help attract attention from tourists and provide them chances to learn about the incident. Darangshi Cave, the late Sinayong's house, and Chongbang waterfall can be part of the tour, as they are representative sites of the incident. Also, as the number of foreigners visiting Jeju is rapidly increasing, I suggest making a smartphone application which will allow them to watch 4-3 incident-related content in various languages. An application seems to be a good proposal to introduce the 4-3 incident to foreigners. Mr. Governor, do you have any further comments? Media will undoubtedly help raise awareness of the 4-3 incident. For example, TV programs or OTT platform contents. Furthermore, to encourage adolescents' awareness, animation movies should be made too. Indeed, great idea, sir. Now, lastly, we shall listen to the President's speech. Whether it be proud or shameful, our duty is to remember and preserve both sides of our history. We should not and cannot leave the 4-3 incident to be misinterpreted. I plead you to practice these suggestions properly. Then the 4-3 incident will be widely known and acknowledged. Thank you. This shall end our 43rd State Council meeting. Did you agree with the opinion of each character? Or did you think of another suggestion? While preparing for this contest, I realized that most found the 4-3 incident unfamiliar. I also realized that the effort of raising awareness is urgent. I wish for a proactive governmental conference like this. If we continue our efforts to spread the incident, the day of everyone remembering Jeju 4-3 incident will be sooner. Thank you.
이어서 서귀포 중앙여자중학교 허가은 학생의 발표가 있겠습니다. 4.3 할머니의 숨겨진 눈물. To Jeju April 3rd and Hidden Tears of Silence라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 저는 참가번호 9번 서귀중앙여자중학교 허가은이라고 합니다. 저는 이 대회를 통해 저희 가족에 대한 이야기를 많이 나누고자 했고 열심히 하겠습니다.
My great-grandmother used to tell my father the story of the 4-3 incident. It was a story about many sad events that took place in Soho village at the foot of Gogun Mountain. A story about armed people coming down with bamboo spears at night, and about the case where the police came and tried to find sympathizers of the armed communes during the day. Of course, she could never forget the tragic story of her own son, who died while serving his duty as a police officer during the 4-3 incident. I heard that she was deeply saddened by the loss of her dear son and had to struggle from the sorrow the entire lifetime. My paternal grandmother's father also passed away while serving his police duties at the time of the incident. What a tragic coincidence. 2 of my family members passed away while doing their job as a police during the incident. Ever since I was in primary school, I have grown aware of the 4-3 incident through various sources of information and education. The more I learned about the tragedy in detail, the more I felt uncomfortable as I started to wonder whether 2 of my ancestors were the victims or perpetrators of the incident. How would you access the deaths of my 2 ancestors? How should I remember them? For both my grandmother and great-grandmother, it must have been the memory of the victims who lost their father and son. According to my great-grandmother, the descendants of both so-called victims and perpetrators were all mingled up and lived together in the village. Therefore, for some people, it would be the history where they had to live in tearful silence. Here, I would like to ask all of you a question, especially for those who are currently remembering and reviewing the 4-3 incident.
Could anyone give me a clear definition of that time in a few words? Some people who did not go through such a tragedy might regard this as one of the events in the past and say, we shall let history take its course. But for my family, it is not someone else's history. It is a history of the mournful deaths of my family. It is a history of the sacrifice of the people who lost the son and the father. Then, how should we move forward as we heal this deep wound? Do we have to be divided into left and right again and blame others by shifting responsibilities? If our ancestors of those days saw the same tragedy repeated in the year of 2022, how would they feel? The cause of the forgery incident might have been the fight for the revolution for some people, or desperate struggle for survival for the others. But whatever the cause, it was our humanity that was collapsed. Respect, love, and trust for each other was all gone. I would like to commemorate both of my ancestors with love, who died while serving their duty as a police officer. And I will also try to comfort and remember the sufferings of many other victims. I believe the true lesson of the forgery incident is to bring about healing and restoration through the process of forgiveness and reconciliation based on love and mutual trust. If you are on either side of a conflict at this moment, I hope you could start sharing love and respect to each other based on humanity. Before closing my speech, I would like to add one more thing. I pray that God's hands of salvation will be with those of the world who are suffering from the war, even at this very moment. Thank you.
중학생 부문 마지막을 장식할 학생은 저청중학교 최현유 학생입니다. 제주의 기억을 공감하는 일. The Memory of Jeju, Emphasizing with the Memory of Jeju라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 저청중학교 다니고 있는 참가번호 10번 최현유입니다. 올해 준비한 만큼 열심히 하고 가겠습니다. 감사합니다. Until about 10 years ago, my family didn't know much about Jeju. When I was 7 years old, I visited April at the Peace Park for a kindergarten picnic. For me, it was simply an exciting picnic in a pretty park. I was shocked there. In the exhibition room, I heard sobbing and gunshots. I also went to a dark cave-like space. I was very frightened. I came out sobbing. And I made a promise to myself that I would not go there ever again. One day in April, my family visited an old woman's house in Suryongdong village, which is my neighborhood. She was preparing a memorial service that day. She told my family about her experience in 1948. At that time, her sister was feeding her baby on the floor. Out of the blue, the gunman rushed in and fired mercilessly. The younger sister and the baby were killed. That day was their Memorial Day. Her eyes turned red as she remembered the painful memory, and she couldn't bring herself to finish her sentence. I was horrified. This atrocity started on March 1st in 1947 and lasted 7 years and then have continued to the present day. I felt like the dark shadow of April 3rd that I encountered at school was falling on me. The records of April 3rd, which were full of sorrow and pain from historical truth and hidden in silence, are still hard to understand for me as a middle school student and a native Jeju person. However, the terrible truth and the pain with bitter grief that my innocent neighbor experience has been embedded in my heart. In Jeju Island, which seems only peaceful and beautiful, almost everywhere is engraved with the painful stories. The fact that the second largest number of innocent Jeju people killed since the Korean War is the harrowing memory of Korean history. We should no longer be silent. Nevertheless, I am very proud of the Jeju people. They endured the painful times, regardless of ideology, overcame all difficulties, protected Jeju, and ended up leading it to an island of peace. This year, the 74th anniversary of April 3rd, Remembrance ceremonies for the victims were held in Boston and New York. Finally, a project to share the memory of April 3rd outside of Korea has begun in earnest. There is not much I can do in Jeju as a student. The only thing I can and should do is to engrave the painful story of April 3rd deep in my heart and never forget it. If I don't truly sympathize with the pain of innocent Jeju people in the past, I can't help but be stranger forever. I'll be sure to be Jeju person, not a stranger anymore. Thank you.
제4회 전국청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회 고등학생부 경연을 시작하겠습니다. 총 8명의 학생이 각각 4, 5분 동안 준비해온 이야기를 발표하게 됩니다. 첫 번째로 이야기를 들려줄 학생은 제주 중앙여자고등학교 김서영 학생입니다. 베일에 쌓인 참혹한 역사, Tragic History Under the Veil 이라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 1번 제주중앙여자고등학교 김서영입니다. 저는 제주도에 와서 처음 이 사건에 대해서 접하게 되었는데요. 사람들이 이 사건에 대해서 잘 모른다는 것에 충격을 받아서 이를 알리기 위해서 이 대회에 참가하게 되었습니다. 열심히 하겠습니다.
If you approach to a Korean and talk about the June democracy movement or the May 18 democracy movement, they will show extreme reaction to the heartbreaking history. However, if you talk about the Jeju April 3rd, there's a great possibility that they show small reaction or even say they don't know about this massacre. The history of April 3rd lasted for more than 7 years, but unlike other movements, this long history is not remembered well by the Koreans, not even the Jeju Islanders, especially their students. To be honest, it hasn't been so long since I first heard about the Jeju April 3rd, as I just moved to this island. Not long after I moved here, I heard my friends and teachers discussing the issue about the April 3rd in class. When this came up, I said, I've never heard of it, and it shocked everyone. I felt embarrassed. I do love my country with honor, and I felt uneasy that I didn't know about something I should have known. It is true that people who are not from this island are not familiar with the April 3rd. However, not being from this island cannot be an excuse for not knowing about it. According to the Jeju 4-3 Peace Foundation, the April 3rd started with the police firing at the March 1st movement assembly, causing 6 victims, including those who had nothing to do with the movement. To protest about this incident, the Jeju residents started a public-private general strike, which made the United States nominate this island as an island of communists. Then, on March 3rd, 1948, armed uprising led by the Jeju Provincial Committee started. They attacked, killed, and tortured the residents just because of the fact they are Jeju Islanders. According to a recent research, this incident caused about 60 to 80,000 of innocent deaths. Terrible things that should not happen to precious lives happened here. But why is it not remembered? Why is it under the veil? The victims and their families were afraid of the collective punishment system of Korea and had to stay silent and convenience the issue. Plus, the government did not want to show their apology, as it would mean that they are approving their wrongs, and tried to hide this incident. Now, things are different. It is time to open this incident to the world and let people know about it. It is time to move forward. This memory should go forward outside this island. How can we do this? By adding it to our history curriculum? That may be useful, but it is never enough. In fact, I do not want the students to first encounter this incident by textbook. Nowadays, history has become a difficult school subject that has to be memorized, something to be graded on. I believe that history should be felt rather than learned, especially for situations like this. It is important for us to feel sympathy and actively engage our emotion to how people were at that time. Letting the students learn through textbook would only make them remember by head, not by their heart. The students should know about the painful history before learning about the details through the textbook. In order to make them actually care about the history, dealing history through mass media would be effective. Recently, Apple TV has released a TV show called Pachinko, a show based on a book that is about the Japanese colonial period of Korea. This show allowed people from all around the world to learn about the Korean history. They were able to see how people were at that time, feel their pain, and at the same time, take more interest in the Korean history. As media is an influential element in sharing the history, the producing platform should create more shows based on the April 3rd incident. Now, I have started to take my step forward as a true citizen of Korea to make up for my ignorance, and I hope you join me through this journey. Thank you.
다음은 한국국제학교 제주 캠퍼스 최준용 학생입니다. 동굴에 갇힌 백인의 꿈, The Dreams of 100 People Trapped in a Cave라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 저는 참가번호 2번 한국국제학교의 최준용입니다. 저는 우연히 어느 날 학교 근처에 4.3 유적지인 큰 넓게가 있다는 사실을 알게 되어서 이 사실을 알리고 싶어 이 대회에 참여하게 되었습니다. 이 대회에서 열심히 해서 좋은 성적을 거두고 싶습니다. 감사합니다.
Do you know who Anne Frank is? Although you might not have read her diary, you surely would have heard about the tragic story of Anne Frank, who wrote of her dreams of the future while witnessing the horrors of the Jewish Holocaust by Nazi Germany. Anne was a young and fun-loving girl. However, her dreams were trapped like a bird in a cage. 8 Jews, including Anne herself, hid themselves in a hideout in Amsterdam for 2 years and 2 months. Anne had to live in a state of constant tension. She could not use fire or water frequently, and she had to always speak silently. Also, she could only bathe once a week. Separated by just a few years from the time Anne lived in the hideout, the beautiful island of Jeju in Korea was experiencing a similar tragedy in even worse conditions. More than 100 villagers had evacuated to their hideout for 2 months. Their hideout was not even a house or a hut, but it was a cave called Kunnorke with a very narrow pathway. The villagers escaped to Kunnorke because of the persecution of Korean soldiers who deemed them to be the Reds, meaning radical communists. However, most of the people living in Jeju had nothing to do with communism. Some were even children in the similar age to Anne Frank. One of the survivors of Kunnorke is Ms. Hong Chun-ho. She was only 11 years old at that time. Her account to life in Kunnorke is tragic and awful. There were little food or water to drink, so she had to survive with potatoes and barley scavenged from outside of the cave at night. She had to drink water falling from the ceiling of the cave or water on the ground inside the cave using a straw made out of silver grass. Moreover,
she had to defecate in a small jar inside the cave because she couldn't go outside. Ms. Hong Chun-ho said, "We live like animals, even worse than animals." However, just a young child at that time, she said to her father, "I want to see the stars at night." Unable to go outside, she did not know if it was day or night. However, despite those deficient conditions, the young girl wanted to see the beautiful stars. The people who escaped to both Amsterdam and Knokke experienced tragic ends. Anne and the others were caught by German soldiers and were taken to a concentration camp. In the concentration camp, Anne witnesses the deaths of her loved ones, and she herself dies by typhoid fever. Likewise, a considerable number of people who evacuated to Knokke died by fleeing from Korean soldiers. Among them, about 40 people were massacred nearby Jeongbang Waterfall, which is now a popular tourist site. Both of these tragedies originated from the fear and hatred of people with different races and ideologies. The victims were ordinary civilians who were uninterested in those political struggles, including children who were unaware of the world. Freedom, a fundamental human right, was destroyed. Anne's dream of becoming an author vanished in a concentration camp, and the dreams of the people who lived in Knokke also ended in a massacre. Today, Anne's diary became a worldwide bestseller, and the hideout that she hid in Amsterdam became a museum to commemorate the tragedy. However, here in Jeju, there are numerous people who live like animals in a cave and couldn't even leave any record. Those are the victims of the Jeju Massacre, long forgotten by Koreans and the world. Today, Jeju is a beautiful island in April with the sea of canola flowers and cherry blossoms all over the island. Many tourists pass by Knokke without a second thought on their way to Shinhwa World, which is a famous amusement park. However, I strongly urge those people to reflect on the tragedy that happened 74 years ago, nearby a place where we now have fun and enjoyment with our families and friends. Thank you for listening.
이어서 한영 외국어 고등학교 조서현 학생이 발표를 하겠습니다. 제주 4.3 아픔의 끝, 제주 April 3rd Ending of Pain이라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 3번 한영외국어 고등학교에 재학 중인 조서현입니다. 저는 더 4.3을 더 좋은 방법으로 알리고자 이 대회에 참가하게 되었습니다. 참가한 만큼 좋은 성적 가지고 가겠습니다. 화이팅! 감사합니다.
Do you know this flower? It's a camellia flower. Camellia flower has a special meaning for Jeju. It is one of the symbols for Jeju April 3rd and the lives that fell like a red camellia flower. In Bukchonli, more than 300 people were killed in the time between 2 days, only 2 days. But Ko Won-sun, who was 11 years old back then, dramatically survived. Her 3-year-old younger brother, however, whose head was injured by a soldier, died 3 years later. After then, Ko Won-sun was accused for being one of the Reds and had to endure the traumatic event for her entire life. Innocent lives were infringed by April 3rd. Yang Bon-jeon, who does a commentary about April 3rd, noted that the dead bodies were shoved into a single pit during the recovery of the remains. And the sparse graves were regarded as taboo and thus left alone. Jeju incident is not one single case that led 30,000 lives to death. Instead, it has to be thought as 30,000 individual cases that denounce the human rights of 30,000 people. The Jeju incident was not well known since Jeju was an isolated island. But what's worse is that the government who tried to conceal it and kept it out of the textbook framed the innocent Jeju people as a rebellious group and justified the action. Unlike the government's claim, the incident was a tragedy that occurred during time between Korea was unstable. We are trying to let the truth to be known. So far, the Special Act on 4/3 brought out the President's apology and the establishment of Memorial Day. But still, many people are suffering from the traumatic past, and the lives of the individuals who suffered in numerous pains are not being compensated. That is why we need to constantly plan campaigns and symposiums internationally to attain public interest. This could stimulate the revision of law and also regain the impaired reputation of victim and the victim's family. We also need to try many attempts socially as well. Digital art exhibition is an effective example. Recently, digital art exhibition was held in Jeju and it caught people's attention and earned a reputation. If we hold a digital exhibition about the beauty of Jeju and the agony of April 3rd's coexistence throughout the whole country, it will be a good chance to inform people about the incident. Additionally, we have to make this incident bigger part of our daily lives. Making April 3rd's own film picture frame is an efficient way to do this. Taking film picture is very popular these days because it enables people to reminisce their delightful memories. Adopting designs that symbolizes Jeju April 3rd in the film as an event would gather interest of the young and would be a great chance to remember Jeju April 3rd. Jeju Island. It is truly beautiful islands located in the southernmost part of Korea. Jeju excites many people just by thinking of it. A retreat full of flowers, dense forest, a place surrounded by oceans of blue, and quiet seasides reminds people of travel, vacation, and healing. But for the natives of the island, Jeju is also a land of painful history. Although apparently dazzling, the soil, the rocks, and shores are concealing the deep wounds of Jeju Island. I'm not saying that we must find out who did well or not. What I'm implying is that the people in the midst of the tragedy wanted an ordinary life in Jeju regardless of their ideology. Still, considering this as an ideological conflict is worthless to the victims. The conclusive goal is to construct a society that promises human rights through reconciliation and coexistence. We need to endeavor to remember this tragedy and lend a helping hand to the victims and their family. Thomas Eliot once said, "April is the cruelest month." But I hope April will no longer be a pain in Korea. From now on, I dream of April full of proud history. Thank you for listening.
다음은 한국국제학교 제주 캠퍼스 정예슬 학생이 발표를 하겠습니다. 작은 섬에서 말하는 큰 미래, A Small Island, A Big Future라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 4번 제주 한국국제학교 정예슬입니다. 제주 4.3이 전 세계 사람들이 알고 기억해야 할 중요한 역사라는 생각이 들어 이 대회에 참여하게 되었습니다. 조금 떨리지만 열심히 해보겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Jeju 4/3 incident. That's how we call it. By definition, an incident is an occurrence of an action or situation that is a separate unit of experience. It is a single event that started and ended. But Jeju 4/3 was so much more than a simple event that took place on an island of South Korea, separate from the rest of the world. Rather, it was a deliberate product of a global ideological conflict of the time, one that continues to this day. In order for us to truly understand 4/3 and avoid repeating the same painful history, we must get to the root of the problem by looking at the larger context behind it, namely the Cold War. It was 1947, 2 years after Korea had gained independence from Japan. But it wasn't long until our ancestors' dream of building a truly independent nation, free from foreign pressures, fell apart, as our land became divided into two sides, between the North and the South, under the influence of the USSR and the United States, which came to control Jeju and its people. It is during this extreme political turmoil that the first shots are fired at innocent residents of our island, following what started out as a peaceful demonstration to commemorate the March 1st Independence Movement Day. Soon, hundreds of civilians rose up against the police violence, the oppressive American military occupation, and most importantly, the May 10th election of 1948 that would be held only in South Korea as opposed to the entire peninsula. Unconditional independence and complete self-determination. That's what the Jeju people wanted and demanded. They yearned for the freedom to shape the future of their own country without any external control. Yet, they were ruthlessly slaughtered, accused of inciting and participating in communist riots simply because they refused to comply with the leaders in power. They called Jeju a red island, and perhaps it's the blood of the Jeju people that made the island so red. This ideological conflict between the left and the right only grew worse after the establishment of the South Korean government, killing countless students, teachers, parents, and children, many of whom had nothing to do with the political and military fights, without a hint of remorse. Clearly, the horror of that April 74 years ago is not unfamiliar to us. Throughout history, all around the world, we have chosen to divide ourselves into groups, declaring anyone with a perspective unlike our own as our enemy, without trying to understand them or find a way to come to a reconciliation. Too many times we've let our hatred and prejudices trample on the most fundamental and valuable human rights. And in that process, too many innocent people have been victimized. But what's even more devastating and important to remember that these issues are far from over. Taiwan, for instance, has suffered from a very similar tragedy in the February 28 incident of 1947, from which the people are still recovering. Also, recently, war broke out between Russia and Ukraine, serving as a painful reminder that the differences in our political and social views are continuing to polarize our world. Now, at this point, we wonder, then how do we solve these problems? What do we do to move forward? Is there anything you and I can do right now to make sure that a tragedy like Jeju 4/3 never happens again? I offer two solutions. First, we need to see each other as human beings without prejudice. We must listen to what other people have to say and put our best effort to understand where they're coming from. We must put all the labels aside, men and women, old and young, black and white, straight and queer, left and right. And we must remember that history cannot be an excuse to neglect our past wrongdoings. We should stop saying things like, back then it was inevitable. There's no such thing as an inevitable violation of human rights. Second, each and every one of us must learn from the men and women of Jeju who fought bravely to protect themselves, their friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors. We must remember their courage and willingness to risk their lives to see freedom and peace triumph in the face of oppression and violence. We must remember the names of our very own heroes, Kim Il-ryul, Moon Young-sun, Kim Sung-hoon, Kang Ge-bong, Ko Ii-jun, Chang Sung-sun, and so many more that we have yet to discover. They've taught us that our rights will be taken away from us only if we let them. To call Jeju 4/3 an incident is to undermine the depth and gravity of the pain that is still just as real to the victims and their families as it was 74 years ago. The gunshots started and ended, but the fight for peace and human rights has always been and will continue to be fought. Today we may be talking about Jeju's past, but the spirit of 4/3 urges us to start dreaming of a better future. Thank you.
계속해서 From Some Whole Asia 이하늘 학생이 발표를 하겠습니다. 돈밭꽃 하나 찾아온 봄. Condolence, Comrade and Camellias라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 5번 브랭스멀 아시아 이하늘입니다. 제가 이번 4.3 대회에 참가하게 된 이유는요. 4.3 사건에 대하여 훨씬 더 많이 알고 싶어서 참가하게 된 이유가 가장 큽니다. 제가 이번에 열심히 준비한 만큼 열심히 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
April 3rd. What comes into your mind? A spring day? Rebirth? For some people, they say it's the day when the cold land, stained with blood, returned to our side as camellias. 74 years ago in April, this island had once been a chaotic bloodbath. And I would like to start by addressing that we should always remember the 4-3 victims' valor and courage. For those who still have a voice, it is our obligation to fill that silence with support and sincere condolence to the victims. Whenever I visit the Jeju 4-3 Peace Park, faintly like an afterimage, I almost hear the victims calling to us an urgent message that the coercion of political ideologies will never be espoused in this country, but will only be treated with animosity. So far, it has been discovered that 14,577 valuable lives were lost during the incident. Were these deaths and the incident necessary? Well, no. It was one of the most lethal, depraved homicides in Jeju. But if someone asked me if their deaths was meaningful, I would say yes. Not because their mortality is justifiable in any way, but because it allowed that urgent message to permeate in all levels of society and across the country in the aftermath. Their deaths spoke louder and evinced than any actions or words. When I was in middle school, I was introduced to the difference between sympathy and empathy. I've learned that feeling pity and sorry about the difficult situation of another and being able to help the person with my follow-up actions were two completely different attitudes. And I believe that being empathetic is the correct attitude to look at the 4-3 incident, which is going beyond dwelling in the narrative, but being bold to take actions. And now is the time. The world also needs your empathy more than ever. Currently, the world is trying to repeat its bloody history. The political ideology polarization is estranging countries from peace and unification. Hearing about the Ukraine victims' suffering, tragic and devastating events is heartbreaking. Therefore, we should not make the same mistake of being cavalier, for we know it cuts deep into the soul. Show your compassionate empathy to those of similar victims, whether that is signing petitions, donating food or clothes, or just spreading awareness. Let's be their comrades, like the 4-3 incident, heroic individuals. I believe that a collective of single waves of action can make a tsunami of a difference. Looking at camellias, I've always felt cryptic and complex. I felt doleful, for I knew what meaning it served, but I also felt pleasant simultaneously. And now I've realized how I felt about the 4-3 incident in the same way. The 4-3 incident left a deep scar in all our hearts. Nevertheless, it is not to be abashed of, because I believe with empathy, we can revive the spirits of the 4-3 incident in the most beautiful way, like the camellias. Thank you.
감사합니다.
이어서 제주 외국어고등학교 최민서 학생의 발표가 있겠습니다. 결코 피지 못한 꽃, Flowers that never bloomed 라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 6번 제주 외국어고등학교 2학년 최민서입니다. 제가 예전에 학교에서 동백꽃과 관련해서 특별한 경험을 한 적이 있는데 이 경험을 제가 다른 사람들에게도 전달해보고 싶어서 이번 대회를 참여하게 됐습니다. 열심히 하겠습니다.
Names that fell before flowers. This phrase refers to the numerous victims of the 4-3 incident in Jeju Island. This is also the title of a collection of poems written by Lee Jung-hyung, and in it lies a 4-3 memorial poem called House of Winds. This poem tells not only the painful history of Jeju, but also the story of the camellia flower. You, who came here to relish the beauty of spring, may not have known that the ground beneath you was the tomb of the dead. As the passage from the House of Winds suggests, many people, like those from the mainland, don't know much about the tragic history of Jeju Island. So today, I'm going to explain to you about how I became a person that explains the meaning of 4-3 to others from a person that didn't know much about the 4-3 uprising myself. It is my wish that from my story, there will be more people who seek to write in the history and tell the story of Jeju citizens for generations to come so that it won't be forgotten. First off, the fact that the flower camellia is a symbol of the 4-3 uprising is something that is always mentioned at least once when a story of the said massacre comes forth. The flower camellia also appears in mine. So here is my story. When I was in middle school, the teachers took me and several other students to the Jeju 4-3 Peace Park, and the place had looked strangely tranquil in the snow. Now that I look back at the moment, it seems like the place itself had been brimming with sadness, containing the history of the time when more than 20,000 innocent lives were made victims of a horrible massacre, making them the flowers that never bloomed. At the time, though, I didn't get a strong impression of the Peace Park. The 4-3 uprising had meant nothing to me. Just a gone past, something to be wept over by the victims, not me. I couldn't understand the teacher's request. Why should we, the people who are living in a world where the 4-3 uprising is already just a past event, care? It is to tell you the answer to this question that I came here. Hopefully, at the end of my story, the answer to this question will be apparent. Going back to my story, the teachers gave me and the other students time to research and discuss about the 4-3 uprising within groups. We spent weeks learning about the massacre, and we made timelines representing the uprising. We read the English translated version of the book on SUNY containing first-hand experiences of the author on the uprising, and we wrote reports about it. This really helped me understand at least a part of what it might have been like in Jeju Island at the time. After spending large amounts of time dedicated to learning about the 4-3 massacre, for about 2 weeks, we worked hard to make paper camellia flowers. Our hands were burned by glue guns. Our muscles were sore from carrying heavy boxes containing magnets for the badges. And although the process was slow, we were able to make more than hundreds of the paper camellia badges. And the day my efforts finally came to an end. We stopped by the Jeju 4-3 Peace Park again and gave the paper camellia badges to each and every tourist entering the main entrance. At first, there were people who refused, people who didn't know much about the 4-3 uprising, like myself just a few weeks prior. So we explained the symbolic meaning of the camellia every time we gave it to the tourists, and when I gave one of the badges to a particular woman, she gave me the camellia that she had, which she had made herself out of ceramic clay. I still keep it at home because for me, it's a symbol that reminds me of the meaningful day when I told others about the painful history of Jeju and raised awareness about it. Later that day, I went home and posted a memorial on the official website of the 4-3 Peace Park as seen on the screen now. You can see how much I was able to change my own perception about the 4-3 massacre through this project. Now I can answer the question I asked above. We should care about this because it is us who have to make sure that thousands and thousands of innocent lives will not go to waste. It is us, the students, who have to make sure that our past stories are not forgotten and our tragic histories are not repeated. It is us, the future generations, who have the responsibility to carry the truth of historical events with us so that the same mistakes are not made over and over. You may not be able to make hundreds of paper camellia badges by yourself, but you can express your attention on the matter in simple ways, such as leaving a memorial note on the official website like I did. I hope that these attentions gather, and for whatever purpose they come to visit Jeju Island in the future, people will look at the camellia flowers in full bloom and think of the victims of the Jeju 4-3 uprising at least once. Thank you.
계속해서 제주 중앙여자고등학교 박규영 학생이 발표를 하겠습니다. 4.3은 더 이상 제주도만의 문제가 아니다. April surge is no longer just a problem of Jeju라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 7번 제주중앙여자고등학교 박규영이라고 합니다. 제 친구들이 이 방송을 많이 볼 텐데 4.3에 대해서 더 자세히 알았으면 좋겠다는 마음에서 참가를 하게 되었고요. 열심히 무대 한번 준비해 보도록 하겠습니다. 화이팅! What comes to your mind when you see camellia flowers? How beautiful are they? The bright red color even shines. You cannot find sadness anywhere. Would you believe it if I say that it actually represents countless sacrifices? How would you feel if I make you to see this red as the color of blood? Camellia flowers are the representative symbol of April 3rd, since they represent the souls that died in desperation. When I was 9, I learned about April 3rd for the first time. When I was 13, I drew a poster of April 3rd. When I was 16, I wrote a letter about the same topic. One thing for sure is that through these processes, the range of my thoughts expanded as I grew up. The more I encountered the content and the wider my thoughts become, it made me keep thinking that this problem is not limited only to Jeju. This incident is a mixture of issues of coercion and violence of that time. 1/10 of Jeju population was sacrificed. The roads were stained with blood, and people were nowhere to be found. We still do not try to remember this. There are still some people who do not know enough about it, because the truth had been buried in the ground for decades for fear of being driven to communism. The past, when people had no choices but to swallow extremely bitter sacrifices. It is now time to dig it out from underground and look at the inside of it. There's a saying that there's no future for a nation that has forgotten history. People should remember the pain of this incident until the end. And those people have to be everyone. This wish is absolutely not absurd. April 3rd has already been designated as a local holiday. It is significant in that it could reveal the truth that was hidden for a long time. However, designating it as a national holiday, not just a local holiday, can pave the way for the event to be known globally. Also, it means that Koreans will not forget this day and win it, reflecting on the meaning of this day. In fact, local holidays introduced by Okinawa Prefecture in Japan have been upgraded to national holidays. As a result, it will be able to relieve resentment by not forgetting the unjust lost souls of April 3rd and remembering them every year. Next, creating an opportunity to inform April 3rd through campaign activities can also make this wish come true. There's a campaign that has become a hot topic on social media at a time when medical staff play an important role due to COVID-19. It's called Thanks to You. Countless people must feel grateful once again to the medical staff for this event. As such, if April 3rd is campaigned through phrases and actions that best represent it, then many people around the world can get it. With this, everyone is eager to build a solid future. And for the better future that we all want, we need to know past clearly, reflect on it, and move on. If not me, who? If not now, when? This is my favorite part of Emma Watson's speech. We all should live with this saying. We all should no longer turn a blind eye to this wound. We all should actively inform others about it. We all should remember this wound. Thank you.
고등학생부 마지막을 장식해줄 학생은 성산고등학교 김혜은 학생입니다. 4.3 사건에 대하여 About April 3rd Incident라는 주제로 발표하겠습니다.
안녕하세요. 참가번호 8번 성산고등학교 다니고 있는 김혜은이라고 합니다. 저는 4.3에 대한 책인 순위 삼촌을 읽고 이 대회에 참가하게 되었는데요. 제가 이 대회에 투자한 시간이 허투루되지 않도록 열심히 임하도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
The 4.3 incident occurred for 7 years and 7 months, and many events have not been accurately identified yet. The background of the 4.3 incident was that after the independence of the Korean peninsula, it was divided into South and North Korea, making communists dissatisfied with the establishment of the US military government. The thing behind the incident was one of the events that took place at 2:45 p.m. on March 1st, 1947. At that time, the commemorative convention was being held in Jeju Island to commemorate the March 1st Independent Movement Day. When the participant was passed in front of Gyeongbokgung Pavilion, an incident happened. A young child hit by the hoof of a horse that carrying on a police officer. The police passed by without noticing it, and people began to protest the mounted one, throwing stones and swearing. Another police officers who watched the situation thought that Jeju people were rioting, so they started to shooting at the people. 8 people were injured and 6 people were killed in the incident. But the police recorded as a result from self-defense caused by the riot. Actually, all the dead were just spectators watching commemorative assembly and the march. It is hard to trust their record. After this incident, 95% of Jeju residents went on a general strike, and on April 3rd, 1948, when the government dispatched more police officers to Jeju Island to control Jeju residents, a 4.3 incident occurred in which the Southern Labor Party of Jeju attacked the police station. After that, a majority of Jeju did not participate in the election on May 10th. The government informed the residents of Jeju Island that they were prohibited from passing except for the 5 kilometer coastline, and if they did not observe this, they would be considered enemies. Unfortunately, some of the residents were not notified of this, and even after hearing this, the people didn't think that they would actually kill them. At dawn, the police and military stormed the village, burning and shooting all the people they saw. And the locals struggled desperately to survive by hiding in a tunnel and fleeing to the mountains. But the police didn't let them go and slaughtered them all. During a day, government forces attacked the residents, and at night, the Southern Labor Party attacked them. Jeju people were attacked every day and every night. The opportunity that the 4.3 incident became known to the world for the first time came in 1978, 24 years after the incident, through the novel Uncle Sunny by Hyun Ki-young. However, Hyun Ki-young was summoned to the police station for publishing the novel, beaten for 3 days, and imprisoned for a month because he published the novel. When I was investigating the 4.3 incident, I thought all the unfairness from historical event is a homework that we who is living in the present should wrap up. I ordered not let the sacrifice and effort of many people be in vain. I decide once again that we must remember and not forget of them. I hope everyone here listening to my presentation would not forget of the pain, would not forget their pain as well. Thank you for listening.
이제 오늘 경연대회 심사 집계가 모두 마무리가 됐습니다. 먼저 세 분의 심사위원 모시고 심사평을 듣겠습니다. 여러분 큰 박수로 맞아주시기 바랍니다.
여러분 수고들 많으셨습니다. 우리 학생 여러분 굉장히 정성을 가지고 준비를 잘 해주셨습니다. 굉장히 수준 높은 스피치 대회였습니다. 굉장한 경합이 있었고 거의 뭐 소수점에서 우열을 가리기 힘든 그런 상황이 발생했습니다. 저희들이 중점적으로 보았던 것이 자기가 말하고자 하는 내용, 이것을 어떻게 스트롱 아규먼트로 해서 이걸 잘 로지컬리 잘 전달했느냐, 그리고 어떤 표현 방법을 썼느냐 하는 것을 중점적으로 보셨다 하고요. 마지막으로 그 영어에 있어서 발음이 원어민처럼 발음을 하는 것도 좋지만 그러지 못하는 경우에 그것이 그렇게 크게 중요한 것은 아니고 또 창의력이 어느 정도 있느냐 하는 것인데, 내용에 있어서도 또 표현에 있어서도 또 영능 방법에 있어서도 창의성이 굉장히 중요하다는 점을 말씀드리겠습니다. 너무 많은 내용을 전달하기보다는 아주 이 컴팩트하게 중요한 요점을 아까 우리 최 교수님께서 말씀하셨습니다마는 한 가지 정도 또는 두 가지 정도의 중요한 이슈를 그것을 논리적으로 풀어내는 힘이 가장 좋다고 생각을 합니다. 수고하셨습니다.
네, 세 분 말씀 고맙습니다. 고생 많으셨습니다. 이제 결과 발표를 남겨두고 있는데요. 심사위원회 점수를 합산해서 최고점을 받은 학생 1명에게 교육부 장관상인 대상이 수여되고요. 본선 진출자 18명 모두가 본상을 수상하게 됩니다. 시상은 입선, 장려상, 우수상, 최우수상, 그리고 영예의 대상 순서로 진행하겠습니다. 호명하는 학생은 무대 위로 올라와 주시기 바랍니다. 먼저 입선 시상은 이선화 한국 유네스코 제주협회 회장께서 수고해 주시겠습니다. 제4회 전국청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회 입선 수상자는 제주중학교 고원재, 브랭섬홀 에이시아 이해담, 브랭섬홀 에이시아 윤정원, 성산고등학교 김혜은 학생입니다. 입선 제주중학교 고원재. 위 학생은 4.3의 교훈을 계승하고 평화와 인권의 소중함을 세계로 홍보하기 위해 개최한 제4회 전국청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회에서 위와 같이 입상했기에 상장을 드립니다. 2022년 8월 6일 한국 유네스코 제주협회장 이선화. 브랭섬홀 에이시아 이해담. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 브랭섬홀 에이시아 윤정원. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 성산고등학교 김혜은. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 다음은 장려상입니다. 시상은 고희범 제주 4.3 평화재단 이사장께서 수고해 주시겠습니다. 장려상 BIS 서예주. 위 학생은 4.3의 교훈을 계승하고 평화와 인권의 소중함을 세계로 홍보하기 위해 개최한 제4회 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치에서 위와 같이 입상했기에 상장을 드립니다. 2022년 8월 6일 제주 4.3 평화재단 이사장 고희범. 효돈중학교 윤기은. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 신성여자중학교 송시윤. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 저청중학교 최현유. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 한영외국어고등학교 조서현. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 제주중앙여자고등학교 박규영. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 제주중앙여자고등학교 김서영. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 다음은 우수상을 시상하도록 하겠습니다. 우수상 영종중학교 정보현. 덕풍중학교 박세인. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 제주외국어고등학교 최민서. 브랭섬홀 에이시아 이하늘. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회 최우수상 수상자는 서귀포 중앙여자중학교 허가은, 한국국제학교 제주 캠퍼스 최준용 학생입니다. 축하드립니다. 최우수상 서귀포 중앙여자중학교 허가은. 위 학생은 4.3의 교훈을 계승하고 평화와 인권의 소중함을 세계로 홍보하기 위해 개최한 제4회 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회에서 위와 같이 입상했기에 상장을 드립니다. 2022년 8월 6일 제주특별자치도지사 오영훈 대독. 한국국제학교 제주 캠퍼스 최준용. 이하 내용은 같습니다. 드디어 영예의 대상만을 남겨놓고 있는데요. 제4회 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회 대상 한국국제학교 제주 캠퍼스 정예슬 학생입니다. 축하드립니다. 대상 한국국제학교 제주 캠퍼스 정예슬. 위 학생은 4.3의 교훈을 계승하고 평화와 인권의 소중함을 세계로 홍보하기 위해 개최한 제4회 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회에서 위와 같이 입상했기에 상장을 드립니다. 오늘 이 소통의 장이 미래 세대인 우리 청소년들이 민주시민으로 성장하는 소중한 계기가 되기를 바라봅니다. 이상으로 제4회 전국 청소년 4.3 영어 스피치 대회를 모두 마치겠습니다. 수상하신 여러분 다시 한번 진심으로 축하드립니다. 그리고 함께해 주신 여러분 고맙습니다.